Welcome to StartupJab. As always, we're your hosts, Teague Hopkins and
Jason Nellis here in the flesh.
Indeed.
Well, the digital.
Today we're talking, the digital. Today we're talking the business of eSports, and we're joined by Alex Fletcher from the Entiva group. We're very excited to have Alex, and we are excited to talk esports and have him correct us when we say all kinds of wrong things, because he knows more than we do about this. So it's going to be a fun experience.
Yeah. So Fletch, introduce yourself. Tell the good people about who you are and what you do.
So I'm Alex Fletcher. Thank you for the intro, Teague. And I'm founder and president at Entiva Group, and we are basically an esports industry analyst firm. And we essentially track the trends, the movement of the burgeoning esports industry.
Very cool.
Excellent. So for folks who may be listening and don't know exactly what we mean when we talk about esports, can you give us a quick little definition? What do you consider to be an esport?
Gladly. So the term is being thrown around more and more today, which I think is good, but it's kind of contributing to a little bit of misunderstanding. Esports is, the best way to look at esports is as the realm of competitive gaming. So video games that are played not necessarily for money, but just in a competitive sense, whether it's 1 versus 1 in a team environment. They're just groups of people getting together, attempting to win at any level, amateur, professional, or anywhere between.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
So out of curiosity, I mean, would you feel as though that, if we're talking about like a bunch of guys who get together, sort of, a friendly couple of games, where they keep sort of a tally of who's winning which rounds, or are we talking like, we're talking about, or are we talking about professional level athleticism here as it pertains to video games?
Yeah. Well, as an industry, yeah, you would be talking at the professional level. So when we cover esports at the industry level, we're talking about the organizations, but also the businesses that are assembled around the professional competitive gaming scene. And I guess the distinction that should be made, because you see a lot of numbers about esports and you say, oh, look how many millions of viewers are watching esports. Esports is a really dynamic and diverse universe. And that, by that I mean, there's not one brand of esport, right? There are multiple game titles that are played professionally across a number of different leagues that exist across the entire world.
So speaking of different brands of esports, can you name a couple of the big ones? We have a question from the chat room. Sean asks, what game is the biggest in the esports genre of all time? A couple folks in the chat talking about StarCraft, League of Legends. Are there other ones that you would include on that top list?
StarCraft is definitely up there. Currently, I would say League of Legends. I was just in New York City for the North American Summer Championships for League of Legends. And I was there with 11, 12,000 other people. So they're the largest esports scene currently, or the esport title. There are others though. Earlier this month, the Defense of the Ancients Dota 2, they had an international event that featured, I don't know if you guys are aware, $18 million prize pool. So that's another big esport title.
Real money. Yeah.
It's prominent.
Must be nice.
Kind of hard to say, but yeah, there are a lot out there.
Yeah. Well, what about, I assume that the proliferation of like Halo and other first-person shooters must be very popular. Counter-Strike, all that kind of stuff must be very popular in esports as well.
Oh, yeah. And in my opinion, I feel that in terms of long-term growth and casual viewership, by casual viewership, I mean people who aren't gamers watching or participating in esports as a viewer, I feel that the first-person shooters have probably the biggest advantage because they're the easiest to follow. I mean, you pick up a game of Counter-Strike on a platform like Twitch, and you can pretty much understand what's going on. You got to kill before you're killed, right? As opposed to League of Legends, where honestly, I took my wife to the North American Championship, and she was lost within like 2 minutes. So it's a bigger learning curve, and I think that as we see more mainstream traction for esports, the first-person shooters are going to probably find it easier to attract more of a casual viewership.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Kiki in the chat says the first-person shooters are basically point weapon at bad guy, which is a pretty easy concept to understand.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that I think is interesting is, yes, and when everyone else is the bad guy, it's easy. One of the things that I think is interesting that's going on is the leagues that are being run by the same company that creates the game. So Riot Games that creates that created League of Legends runs the League Championship Series, and I guess it's now Microsoft and 343 that own the Halo brand are opening up a Halo Championship Series with Halo 5 coming out this fall.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a is that a direction that we're moving in for more esports, or are the independent leagues like MLG and ESL really going to be the sort of long-term model?
I wish I could say what the long-term model will be. I will say that there's a bit of I don't want to say conflict of interest when you have a game developer solely maintaining and governing their own esport league. But if you think about it from a business perspective, when you're in the business of selling a game, your number one priority and objective is the continuance of your game. And as long as the esport ecosystem helps drive that, that's all well and good. But sometimes it becomes difficult in the case of Riot Games to effectively grow an esports ecosystem without sacrificing maybe some of the commitment to your game title. And that there comes a time when you get to a certain level and you have a certain amount of penetration, a certain amount of viewership, that you have to make decisions that might not, I don't want to say vibe well with the direction of the game, but that might take precedence over your position as a game title. And I don't know how sustainable it'll be for publishers as a whole to manage their own leagues as esports continues to grow.
Interesting. Okay. So if we're talking about sort of managing leagues and how that plays into the business of esports, where's the money coming from in esports? What are the opportunities you see here? How much does it mirror the way that traditional sports are organized, and in what ways is it different?
That's a really good question. I tried to.
He's really good at questions. It's the only reason we keep him around. He's really good at questions.
Good questions, no answers. Yeah. I do the easiest part.
Okay.
I'll do my best to address that, because I think that when you talk about esports, the moniker has been very valuable in terms of giving it a reference point, right? People can understand the notion of teams, competition played out over the digital realm, right? Video games as a quote unquote sport. Esports as a whole, though, is a little bit bigger than just its competitive elements, because I think it involves a lot of trends, or it's a part of a larger trends as it relates to global entertainment and media. And I'll try to keep this brief, but there's a whole host of kind of factors that have contributed to making esports as popular as it is today. And a lot of it has been things like consumer generated content, like streaming, right? The ability to easily access the athletes, the teams, the direct integration with technology and social media. So there's a big part of what we know as esports that corresponds to traditional sports. Like I said, the teams and the players, the personalities, but then there's that other element that is all about the shift away from a lot of the traditional media mediums like television towards more democratized platforms.
We're getting direct to the players over streaming, and and that's why Amazon paid nearly $1 billion for Twitch, right?
Exactly, and that's where a lot of the business opportunities are going to be found. Believe it or not, it won't just be in sponsoring esports teams like you sponsor sports teams, but it'll be in terms of building on those shifts that esports does a good job of representing.
And so when we're talking about like the teams, are we talking about teams in the sense of like, an NFL team? Are these teams where there's an owner who is, has a chunk of cash and they're hiring these players and they're building a franchise? Or are teams sort of a group of good players get together and decide that they want to go pro.
Yeah, more the latter than the former currently. And I think time will tell whether they'll scale to the level of an NFL or like a Premier League football team where you have these global quote unquote franchises that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes even into the billions. We're not anywhere close to that in esports today. They're more like you said, a congregation of players with an owner. There are roles like analysts, coaches, managing directors that correspond to traditional sports, but nothing at that same scale yet.
Yeah.
And are these folks all getting paid, or are a lot of them volunteers?
Yeah, there he goes with the questions again. Great question.
Literally, it's all we keep them around for. I mean, that's
So Teague, that's a key issue in the industry. There's a great deal of enthusiasts in the esports world, so there's quite a bit of willing volunteers. And I'd say that right now in the quote-unquote labor market, there's more supply than there is demand for paid positions. And you see a lot of very talented young people who are extremely passionate about gaming, esports, that have contributed a lot of time and energy and resources, but there aren't as many paid positions. On that note, you're seeing, as of today, I don't know if you guys saw the announcement, but ESPN is hiring an esports editor. So you're starting to see more and more of that in the traditional world, the overlap of esports, and I think that's going to help out. But right now, it's not quite there yet.
There was a line in Gawker today that was ESPN figures out it can be the ESPN of sports gaming, or of gaming sports, rather.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what happens because, ESPN's president, John Skipper, has been none too complimentary towards esports in the past. I think it was a year ago he said, it's not a sport, it's a competition. Chess is a competition. Checkers is a competition. Mostly I'm interested in doing real sports.
Right.
Yeah.
And now it seems like they're doing an about face. It'll be interesting to see
when the money changes,
what the fan reaction
if somebody goes,
exactly.
Make dollar bills here. Anyway.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, Seth, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, Seth, welcome.
Hey, guys.
Welcome to the chat.
Hey, how's it going? I just had a couple things to say. Fletch, you were just talking about like the team structure, and I noticed over the years, like I primarily, we've been working in the video game industry for a long time. Our founder was the CTO of Agora Games, and they were bought out by MLG, so they did a lot of the events and stuff like that. But we've been working with Riot Games for close to over 3 years now. And I was at Seoul, South Korea last year for the league championship. And first of all, they had 50,000 people in the FIFA stadium, and that was just incredible. And they had Imagine Dragons open up. It was insane. But my point was the team structure. I think there's two things we're seeing here. One, we originally had people who were created teams like Reggie, who is the owner of TSM. They are the NA, most popular team out there. So it's a self-made team. And if you look at their finances and stuff, they make a ton of money. And a lot of it's streaming, sponsorships, and all that other stuff. Mm-hmm. Now we're starting to see business people actually buy teams, which is interesting. So people who've never even been into so we had there was a team called Team Coast. We almost sponsored them one time just for shits and giggles, but their team was owned by a business person. He was into startups and stuff like that. So basically he just went in and bought the team. And what they do is they just get a house and they have, 5 or 6 kids or young people, and they live together. And so all he would do is pay for them to fly everywhere and, try to get into League of Legends and their finals and stuff like that. So there's just two types of team ownership there. One is self-made and one is bought. And we're starting to see that purchase, of teams now.
So it's a little bit like the sort of early football association teams in the UK, where you have these, these regional sort of club teams that organized competition were playing and sort of like not really owned so much as an association of players. And now that we've got, more media coverage and media rights, and there's a lot of, marketing going into it, you've got, well, not now, but for many years now, we have, people with money coming in and buying it as a business and treating the entire thing as a business venture. And so we're starting to see the very beginning of that in esports, it sounds like.
Yep. And one good moneymaker for them is streaming. And that's where they get a lot of their money, because if you think about it, somebody can play a video game for 15 to 16 hours a day. An athlete can practice for 3 hours, so that's the difference. Now you have self-generated content over a 14-hour, 16-hour day, as to where, there is no self-generating content for any sort of sport, professional sport, competitive.
So is that why we see less commentary about esports and more like actually just streaming of people playing esports? Is because if I have a choice between watching someone talking about it and watching someone play it, I might just go watch somebody play it, because there's always somebody playing it, and there's always probably somebody pro playing, if not in a tournament, they're streaming practices and things like that.
I mean, that's kind of how I see it. League of Legends right now has 122,000 viewers on Twitch right now, and that's just one platform. Dota is 140, and these are just individual
we're
players.
doing this wrong. We should just be playing Dota all day.
Exactly. So there's a question in the chat about is that sustainable, about people playing 14 hours a day? Thanks, Ryan, for the question. Is that sustainable? Is this part of what leads to esports athletes retiring young? Right. I mean, there's some talk of reflexes getting a little bit slower over time, but most esports players, pros, retire in their early to mid 20s, right?
Yeah, very true.
So we're talking, if they start playing in high school, maybe a 10-year career.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the kind of overlooked elements of professional esports players is the lack of overall financial sustainability. Now, they're the top teams. You mentioned TSM, Seth, Team Liquid. They're in North America, of course, across the world. Fnatic. There are a lot of the top level organizations. The players do very well. There are gamers in Korea who are making 7 figures from playing video games in one way or the other, not just as a salary from their teams, but from the income based on streaming, sponsorships. But I think that overall, we're seeing that there isn't as strong a career path for professional gaming as one might think in general. And I won't go into specifics there, but it comes down to the fact that you have a tremendous amount of output in terms of time and energy that it takes to get to that level and maintain yourself at that level. But over time, when there isn't an according or proportional career path, or I don't want to say it comes down to how much you get paid, but at the end of the day, if you're spending 14 hours a day gaming and that's your life and you're getting paid like an independent contractor, there can be some issues with how long you're going to continue to do that.
Well, but isn't that actually sort of in a strange way? I mean, it was certainly true of like football's early days, and is it in a way kind of true now? I mean, one of the things about athletic and sports culture that we don't do really well right now is help a lot of our, particularly the lower tier guys, the guys who don't, they don't make the Wheaties boxes and they don't make the big promotional deals. I mean, a lot of these guys who have been playing football, for example, since high school, who went to college solely to play for OSU or somebody like that, they go play for a couple of years for the Bears, the Eagles, and the 49ers, and then, suddenly they're out of it. I mean, it seems to me that it's actually more of just a problem that we have culturally, that we do a very bad job supporting our athletes of all sorts, or our competitors, let's call it, since, I mean, you don't have to be in shape to play video games. Let's just call it what it is. You have to be in a certain kind of shape, but it's not the same athletic shape. It's the same way that you can be a fat guy playing ball. You can be a fat guy who bowls, still get a 300 consistently. I mean, I guess I'm not getting off topic. My point is, do you see esports being a way to shift that culturally to help be sort of the next push towards saying, we've got all these kids who they finish at 26 or 27 and they don't have any life skills after that. We have to figure out what path they're going to take next as a logical extension.
I think there's a huge difference though. So obviously, right? So somebody who plays, football, yes, they're playing football for an extended period of time. What happens when they retire? They coach.
Also, if they're playing football, probably they have also gotten at least some college, right? Most of these esports pros, like if you're starting in high school, you may skip college entirely. Yes, unless you're going through. There's now a college league, right?
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Okay, tell us about
League of
Legends
League. League of Legends actually has their own college league. It's collegiate, and they sponsor kids to go to school for playing League of Legends. Plain and simple. I mean, they're getting so large that they can do this stuff, but they're trying to make education primary. They don't want kids dropping out of college, right? That's. I mean, because that looks bad on. They're trying to be in the world championships and, they're retiring at 22. Now what? Well, now you can stream on Twitch for, 14-hour or 8-hour days as a work day. Night Blue is a perfect example of somebody who was, they were able to become a professional gamer. They did. And then he just was like, professional scene's not for me. So I'm just going to continue to have a 9 to 5, every week, and he plays League of Legends from Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 2, and he's making 6 figures. Well, I mean, don't quote me on that. I'm not really sure what he's making.
Well, but that raises a good question that Cliff was just asking. Okay. I mean, what are I'm going to adjust the question just a little bit. What are the range of like, let's call it, annual revenue or annual salary that these guys can expect? I mean, are we talking, most players are making 25 to 50 a year, or can there be upwards of 6 figures?
Yeah, and it depends. I think that, just to use, Seth, you were talking about Riot Games and League of Legends. Riot does an extremely good job of establishing within their league, their professional leagues across the world, a minimum salary. So they have the resources to go in and say, I think they compensate all of the active players in their leagues with, I think it's $12,000 a year towards whatever expenses so that's what every player who's on a roster gets from Riot Games. Now, interesting. Riot is the exception there, because if you look at how most leagues are structured, if you go to like a Dota 2, where Valve Software, who's the publisher for Dota, they don't take as forward a stance on the different Dota 2 leagues that exist, or the tournaments, if you will. And so there's no notion of a minimum salary there, and it's hard to say how much each of those players are making and what the financial feasibility for being a Dota 2 player is, even though we know that the team, the Evil Geniuses, who won the international, they took home, I think, $6.6 million as a team. So, I mean, that's a big chunk of change there, right? But overall, it's hard to really say, unlike in football where you say there's a rookie minimum, a veteran minimum, that level of organization isn't quite there across the entire scene, which complicates us figuring out how feasible or realistic it is to continue to be a professional gamer over one's lifetime.
Well, and those minimums in the NFL didn't come from the NFL itself as a league entity like they are for Riot. They came from the union, right? Right. I mean, is there anything like a union for esports players?
No, absolutely not. I don't know. Seth, you want to weigh in there?
I don't think there is a union right now for esports players. I think it's too early.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked out for my alma mater, Northwestern. So clearly,
well, yeah, that's a very interesting parallel there, because Seth, you mentioned it being too early. There's a lot of the esports marketplace is maturing. I think that it's going to take some more maturity for a union to be financially feasible. If you let's just look at the NFL, right? The way that the union is actually funded is through the sale of media rights. So the National Football League Players Union, they basically sell the rights to their images and their likeness, I think they sell it to the league, to the NFL.
So
NFL buys it.
And when you're buying EA Sports Madden, you're supporting the NFL Players Union.
There we go.
Right.
So there's a business side to that doesn't exist in the esports world, and there have been rumblings because I think earlier this year there was a pretty nasty story about how this young 16, 17-year-old gamer was basically being threatened by his team owner to stay on the team even though he didn't want to, because I believe they were paying on his they were paying him salary or something, but they threatened to do something to him, and he kind of went to Reddit, and it leaked that he was basically being intimidated to staying on the team. And it was kind of a buzz around, well, why wasn't there anyone looking out for him? Why wasn't there any means of grievances or for him airing his grievances? And like you said, Seth, it just doesn't exist right now. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that even though it could be, it probably should be here, it's probably not ready for it at this time.
Well, so one of the other things that is currently being discussed in the chat, and if you guys in the chat are at all interested, I think there's some good conversation happening in parallel here. But one of the things that I think that I wanted to ask as a sort of 1 degree away question was about the added legal issues and the licensing issues around the fact that, football itself is not owned by an entity, right? There is no person who owns the game football, but somebody owns League of Legends, right? Somebody owns Halo, somebody owns Dota, right? So there's an added legal, question of, okay, now we're forming leagues around somebody's intellectual property. Do you guys, it's just, that's going to be a complication pretty quickly. I mean, do you guys see that being any sort of, question when it comes to ownership around this stuff? I mean, are these, the esports leagues going to have to also be owned by Microsoft and, and folks who are doing development of gaming platforms like this?
Yeah. And thanks to Hawkeye in the chat for bringing that up. In addition to the challenge of unions and them owning the IP, I think that this shows itself also in the way that esports are broadcast, because you look at, the broadcast of physical sports, and a lot of the innovations come from the broadcasters. And so you'll see things like the zipline cam in NFL games that broadcasters were able to bring that innovation to the game. But if you're trying to broadcast esports, you're limited to the camera views that the developer has put in the game. So they actually have a lot more control than really anybody does in a physical sports thing, physical sports competition.
That's a very good point.
Hawkeye just kind of mentioned something that was interesting. Sorry, I didn't mean to call that out. This is not my show.
No, call it out, man. That's cool.
Well, Hawkeye said, when Riot took competitions in-house, my job running tournaments for Curse became irrelevant. That's just interesting to see that, before it used to be like a grassroots thing of, creating events and tournaments and stuff. And now, they're so large that they're just creating their own events. What do I want to say? Finder, I guess you could say. No,
I mean,
I'd have to sign an NDA with the entire chat to talk more about this, but all
right, we can.
Anyways, I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, we can use vague, ridiculous terms. Okay, well, you know what? Actually, this works. And Teague, Teague, feel free to replace me. I actually have to step out. I apologize. I have to go pretend to be a grown up for a little while and not talk about video games. But I do want to say, Fletcher, we really appreciate you jumping on. Obviously, Teague is going to continue the conversation. Seth, you're awesome as well. Guys, thank you very much. I'll see you at the next Startup Jab. And in the meantime, I'm going to plug this now so that Teague will remember to do it later. Sign up for our newsletter. Sign up for more of us, startupjab.com. And with that,
see you, dude.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. We're going to keep on going. Hawkeye, you've got some great points in the chat. Would you like to hop in here? We've got an open seat now for you to join us.
Yeah, if anybody wants to hop in too, I can jump out, whatever. But I love talking about this stuff.
Okay, Hawkeye needs to swap PCs because someone is on a conference call in his office. Cool, so we'll get Hawkeye in here in a minute. In the meantime, let's go back to the challenges around players retiring young, because I think this is a really interesting it's an interesting difference between esports and physical sports is how do you keep the fan base and how do you keep the institutional knowledge when your players are at most sticking around for 10 years and then they're out? Are we dependent on bringing those players back in as casters, as analysts? Is that the only model we have going forward, or are there other options to sort of keep the fan base and keep people involved for a longer period of time in esports?
I think there are multiple ways that they can do this. Like, for example, Nightblue, I think he built his fan base based on that he was a TSM sub. He was a sub for the team. He was a jungler.
TSM is Team Solo Mid?
Yep, sorry.
Yeah.
I talk about it
cool.
too much.
Just checking.
So he was a sub for TSM, and with anybody who's on any competitive sports league, they want you to stream because that's bringing in sponsorship revenue and money. So therefore, just by having that TSM name, it's like saying Nike for Tiger Woods. He's building up his fan base based on that TSM name. And now, he's required to do it, 8 hours a day anyways, he already has his community. His community's already built up. He's up to like he's like 950 some thousand subscribers on Twitch.
Yeah. So what does the revenue flow look like for that? If someone is part of a professional team and they're streaming, do they get their streaming revenue, or does the team get their streaming revenue? And how does that compare to like the tournament winnings revenue? How does that get split out?
I think that's based on their contract, because every pro player
has there conventions for that, or is it totally different for every case?
I would say it's totally different. Depends if they live in the house, maybe too.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So yeah, a lot of esports teams provide team housing where they live together and practice together in the same physical space, right?
TSM has their own house. A lot of them have their own house, and I think there's going to be a social impact on these kids too. I think it's more than just thinking about early retirement. I think they're not going to have a lot of social experience with. I was watching one of the streams one day, and one of the guys was like 23, and he's never been to a club. He's never driven. That's all he does is game all day long, every day of the week.
In a lot of ways, I guess the analog is less NFL and more gymnastics, right? Because you're starting from such a young age and giving up all of that. All of the other experience to compete at the highest level.
Yeah. Or even tennis. I like to make that parallel where
tennis,
pros, they're playing, they're traveling just until they stop. And when they stop, it's a drastic change because they don't really know anything else, And gymnastics, depending on what your career is, typically doesn't span into your 20s. But I think with gamers, you grow up and you could go from your early teens through your 20s, and those are very key development years for young people. And when you're so heads down focused on any one thing, it's a sacrifice, certainly.
Right. Sure. We talked a little bit at the beginning of the show about the definition of esports and how we're including not just pro players but also organized competitions. Are you seeing any sort of organized minor leagues or amateur leagues evolving?
I think Hawkeye would definitely love to talk about that. But I think there's amateur leagues all the time. I could show you something that I might have or might not have had a thing in building and designing.
Okay.
So basically, Riot created their own events finder, and this is a way for the amateur leagues to come in and create their monthly tournaments or weekly or daily or whatever. So they have this, they have things like this all the time. And Riot's not the only company to do this. There are also some third party apps out there that you can just create your own tournaments.
Yeah.
Okay. And so these are. Go ahead.
Oh no! Did you want to move on from that, T?
No.
Oh,
tell me your thoughts.
One key element, I think, to the notion of amateur play is actually amateurism. So there's no definition of what an amateur is in esports, right, Seth? It's almost like, well, when do you actually turn pro? When you sign a contract? If you sign a contract once and you're in, to stick with the League of Legends analogy, you're in the LCS, but your team is relegated, which means it doesn't qualify, so it drops back into what they call the Challenger Series. Are you an amateur then, or are you still a pro? So part of that fits into that bigger picture of, maybe players' rights, players' union, governance, because if you're going to have a strong amateur system, you have to have a strict definition of amateurism. They kind of go hand in hand. It would almost be like if college basketball in the U.S., for example, we didn't know when someone was a pro or wasn't a pro, and there was a loose definition of a player being available or eligible to go pro. They kind of just signed on with teams when they wanted to. They left the team. You could see how that would wreak havoc across, basketball as a whole, as a competitive sport, amateur and professional, right?
Sure. Yeah. As we're waiting to try and get Hawkeye in the chat here, if any of you guys in the chat have questions, you can use the /Q command to add those questions, and we'll try to take those as we're moving forward. So in terms of this idea of amateurs, is esports a little bit different because it's not physically bounded? So instead of being limited to playing like pickup basketball with the people the kids on my street, I grow up playing esports with people all over the world through various matchmaking algorithms who are theoretically at my level. How does that play into the development of e-athletes?
Well, welcome, Mike.
Hey, Mike, welcome to the chat. We can't hear you. Try check your mic. Still nothing.
Might have to restart the browser again, Mike. That happens from time to time.
We're going to see if we can get some tech support on this. While we're waiting for that to sort itself out.
Do you want to weigh in there? Or?
Sorry, what was the question?
Talking about the difference between physical sports being physically bounded, where you can only play with people who live near you, versus esports being inherently online. You can sort of play with people anywhere in the world, even just pick up games because of matchmaking in various systems. So if I want to go play Halo, the Halo matchmaking system will match me up against opponents of theoretically similar skill anywhere in the world, not just the people who happen to live on my street. And
that algorithm is a bitch. Sorry, they want you to win 50% and lose 50%. It's that algorithm is rough. That matchmaking algorithm, but it's kind of interesting. So for competitive sports, you have that algorithm to match you with anybody based on your skill level, your EVO rating, which is your skill level. And now there's new things.
Is the EVO rating like an ELO rating in chess?
I'm not.
I think that's where they derived that from, actually.
Yeah, it's basically the same system.
Yeah.
Okay.
But hey, Hawkeye, welcome to the chat.
Welcome, Hawkeye.
Hello.
And then you're starting to have things like Overdog. I don't know if you guys ever have seen Overdog. It's a new Xbox One app based on, so it matches you with people based on your skill, or not your skill. I'm sorry, what you like in life. Your social aspect. We actually built that here at MadGlory for actually an ex-NFL pro football player who was the co-founder. But so I don't think there's going to be anything like that competitively. Obviously. You can't just say, hey, this guy likes basketball and I like basketball, so let's go play League of Legends together because we like each other. It's not gonna. You can't have that competitive advantage.
Sure.
So,
So
to answer your question, yes, it's easier. Obviously, everything's online.
Good.
Well, and a larger player base helps too, because when I played basketball here in my neighborhood, there was no guarantee that I was constantly, growing and evolving and learning. Because sometimes I'm playing with people who are so much better than me, it's a joke that I'm there. And sometimes I'm playing with people who are so much worse than me that I'm just racking up points and barely trying.
Sure.
When your playing group is the 8 other kids who live on your street, there's no guarantee that you're going to be playing at a level where you can continually grow. Whereas when your player pool is the other 6 million people playing League of Legends right now, it's much easier to be put in a skill group where it's like, okay, these people are good enough that you can not get dominated, but they're also as bad as you are. Right. So you're not, it fits in that area for growth.
So in addition to having the advantage of there's 6 million other people playing, so you can always find a game at any time of day or night, you also have 6 million people playing, so you can probably find someone relatively close to your skill, so you have the opportunity to keep learning. And as we know from books like Theory of Fun by Ralph Koster, learning is part of what makes games fun. And so the ability to keep learning is what makes it an enjoyable experience over the long term. And so part of that is what I guess gets people so interested in esports and video games and keeps them coming back.
And I think that's why League is so popular, to be honest with you. Based on like Call of Duty or Halo. Yeah, there's new versions of Call of Duty or Halo, and they might come up with like a double jump or something like that, and they throw that into the competitive scene. But League of Legends is always evolving. Excuse me. The new patches, like Worlds this year is going to be on a new patch. It's like 5.18, I believe. Every year they change something. So
and the players call that the meta, right?
Well,
this is the
yeah, but the problem is it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, having an evolving meta keeps the game interesting, especially for casual players.
Looks like you're dropping out a little bit.
At the same time.
Oh man, I want to hear this too.
Okay, hold on.
Maybe have a bandwidth issue.
Let's try that. Yeah, I'm on Wi-Fi. I got kicked out of my office,
okay.
So I'm on Wi-Fi now.
Wi-Fi is the challenge.
All right, I'm hardwired in now. I got my Surface. I have a little USB Ethernet port.
Excellent.
I think I'm good. Hardwired in now.
Yeah, that is better. Thank you.
Is that any better? Perfect. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, with an evolving meta, you have continual new interest. People can always find something that's fun for them. The downside is you have massive changes in how the game is played, and it's not something pros can predict. When I worked for Curse, we had a really, really talented player who's one of my favorite people in esports, Voyboy. And great player, the best streamer I have ever worked with, ever. Like, he's just amazing. But the problem is he'd have entire seasons on a couple of different teams where the meta shifted 100% away from his play style. And you'd have guys forced to quickly learn play style or become irrelevant. And especially with transitions between different lanes and things like that, it makes things ridiculously hard on people doing this for a living because it damages stability. Being a good top laner in Season 2 did not mean you were a good top laner in Season 3. Because in Season 2, every top laner was played by a high-health tank with crowd control, and in Season 3, every top laner was a burst assassin whose job was to roam the map and assist the jungler in picking up extra kills. And so people who were gods in Season 2 lost their jobs.
And so that's contributing to the short.
And there's no way to predict these meta changes. And gave a whole set of problems with being competitive.
Yeah, so and that's contributing to the short careers of professional gamers is the fact that it's not just that they may be burning out or aging out on reflexes, but they're also they may be, the game may be changing out from under them, and they have to get back up to that level, and that maybe not an option for everybody. So Hawkeye, or I don't know if you prefer Hawkeye or Mike.
I respond to
Cool.
both.
All right. Do you want to give us a little bit of introduction to you and your background? Because I was reading your profile, but I don't think the everybody listening knows what your experience has been.
Right. So I've been involved in esports for about 7 years now. I was the head League of Legends admin for North American ESL back in season 1 and 2. So I ran competitions for their IEM qualifiers, stuff leading into Worlds. Then I went to Curse, and I was the tournament director for Curse. When Riot brought out LCS, almost lost my job because tournaments were no longer viable. So we.
Damn.
Are you guys hearing?
You're breaking up again.
Yeah.
All right. So that's not just me, Mike. I think your internet connection is on the fritz again.
AFK.
AFK. It's the lag. Blame the lag, right? So folks in the chat, again, if you've got questions, feel free to yell them out, and we'll try to get to them while Hawkeye is reconnecting. ESL, which Mike was just talking about, is one of the largest sort of independent organizers of leagues and tournaments, along with MLG, and I guess there's a few others. And I believe ESL just sold a majority stake for 87 million or something along those lines in the last couple of months.
They did indeed.
Now that's not. Yeah, it's not on the level of something like Twitch, which sold for nearly $1 billion, but still, 87 million is not an insignificant amount of money.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is, as the industry matures, some of the forerunners and the larger organizations are finding quite a bit of financial viability. I think the next step is to see some of that, because you have these publishers like Riot, Seth, Valve, who are obviously sitting on proverbial golden goose, but there's a need for, in my opinion, more widespread financial stability across the organizations, the teams, the players. That's really going to help the scene grow, because you talked about the game changing, the meta changing from season to season based on patches, based on the changes to the game itself. But stability overall is what's going to help grow the esports experience. Because for those of us who have been involved in esports for years, who've been gamers our whole lives, it's kind of an easy way you can kind of jump in and get involved. But a big picture, when you're talking about audiences and viewers and spectators who may not have that same background or understanding, if you have a high level of instability, it's going to make it hard on people like sponsors, non-endemics, and other people who want to get involved to really grasp a hold and get attraction there.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that I think is interesting about esports is that it's somewhat inscrutable from the outside. It's very difficult to find out about and get into the esports scene if you're not already in it. And I think part of that is that a lot of the coverage caters to other players, and so there's a lot of terminology, there's a lot of acronyms. It's very hard to get a sense of the whole space of esports unless you have been in it and you're living it and you're breathing it day in and day out. It's sort of it can be a challenge even just to figure out what tournaments matter and which ones don't, and what what the big sports are.
I was just going to say, I think Riot does it kind of brilliantly right now, though. For example, like cosplay is huge, right? In esports, cosplay and esports go hand in hand, especially with League of Legends. So, I mean, you might have a girlfriend or whatever, and if she doesn't know or care about League of Legends, you can say, "Hey, do you want to cosplay?" And before you know it, now you have, you're going with your partner to an esports event, and she's participating, you're participating. It's easier to kind of grow organically, I would say. In that sense.
Well, yeah. and that's not to say that there are not women who are esports athletes. In fact, wasn't one of the best StarCraft 2 players in the world a woman recently?
And there's also I think it's a amateur team that's trying to get into the Worlds. I or not Worlds. They were trying to from a existing team. I can't remember who it was, but they had, I think their bot lane support was a female, and that's fine. That's, I guess.
So it's still a small
example.
It's still a small portion of the demographic. Do you think part of that is attributable to the reception from the fans? I mean, I know there's a lot of it's very difficult to be a woman in gaming. There's a lot of sexism thrown around. There's a lot of attacks, a lot of vitriol. Do you think that is that hurting esports on the whole? Is this something that we need to, as a community, clean up before we can sort of move on to the next level?
I think that's one thing. Yes, I think that's very important to clean up. I think just being toxic in general, toxic is like, flaming or flipping out during the game. It happens, online all the time. And it's not just, video gaming. It's, Twitter or any sort of online social community. There's no repercussion for, saying something bad to someone. So, I mean, I think in general, yes, that needs to be cleaned up. That's one thing.
Fletch?
Oh, definitely. I think there are some key challenges. I think that there was a North American challenger team that qualified with a female player.
That's what I'm talking about, Fletch. I can't remember who it is.
I can't remember the names or the details, but they did qualify. And by qualify, that means that they were in the Challenger Series, which is a circuit beneath the League Championship Series, and they played their way in to LCS, essentially. And they interviewed her, and the first thing that she said was, I'm glad, to be the first quote-unquote female League of Legends pro, but I don't know if I'll continue to do this. And the question was, well, why? And it kind of came out a little bit later that, there are a lot of obstacles that being a female gamer represents, or that they're entailed with being a female professional gamer. And most of it isn't positive, right? And so there are questions of maybe
by obstacles, you mean sexism, right?
Yeah, sexism and just.
Okay. We're not talking about there's no difficulty in competing in the actual game. It's purely the environment that's created by the
lack of support systems. Where you're a female gamer. Are there other female gamers that understand what you're going through? And maybe that's a big deal, right? Who do you talk to at the end of a tough day? If all your teammates are, they might be there for you, but they just maybe don't understand your perspective. So those are all things that I think should be developed and looked at. I'd love to see the first female gaming megastar. Maybe that's esports' big mainstream breakthrough, right? We find a great female gamer and she's awesome on the digital playing field, and she becomes a spokesperson for the entire genre. But
I mean, go ahead. Sorry, Fletch.
No,
I was just going to say, oh man, there's a lag. It's me, I think. I was just going to say, there's look at Ronda Rousey. She's making MMA. She's like the hit of MMA right now, and that's awesome. And I think that's just our culture. I do think that esports, I don't want to say it should be easier for a female to overcome those obstacles, because there's no support right now for that. If there were support for female competitive play, then I really think it's one of the few multiple person teams that can overcome sexism. Like, you can't have right now. There's no female baseball player in American League Baseball. Why can't there be?
And I fully acknowledge that we are probably part of the problem here, because we've had an entire show talking about esports and it's 5 men, right? So I'll own up to that one. That's on me. We'll try to do better next time. As we're coming to the end of the show, I want to throw a question to you guys. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in esports? If someone were coming along trying to do a startup in esports, what would they? Where would you recommend they look? What would you say that they focus on?
Seth, why don't you go ahead and take that one first?
I was gonna offer you first.
Gotcha.
I think for a startup business, we've Mubs and I know he's in here. Fantasy betting, yeah, that's a new one. Ashton Kutcher just backed.
Yeah.
Ashton Kutcher,
Unicorn.
Cuban just backed. Unicorn, which is a fantasy betting. I think fantasy betting is huge. I think anything that one thing we made during like a startup weekend was like it was called Teamo. It was where you can find players so say you're a 3-person team and you want to go to the challenger and you're good, you're all challenger people. Well, I want to find, a support and I want to find like a tank. And you can actually have your own website.
These are positions in League of Legends. There are 5 different typical positions that people play. I'm doing a little bit of translating here because I know when I started looking at League of Legends, I had no clue what people were talking about when they were saying, a jungler and a top and a bottom and all these things that are, positions in the game that,
Yeah, sorry about that. We deal with it. We're primarily in the video game. We build communities for video game companies. I don't know if I said that right. Community, yeah. But anyways, for startups, I think it's anything that can create money. I think it's anything to make them easier. I know we had Mike in here who used to work for Curse. Curse is huge. If the video game industry is moving so quickly and rapidly, if you can build something for them that makes gaming easier for gamers, they'll probably buy you. I mean, they have the money, so why not?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to take a kind of a different angle there. I think that was great, especially the esports gambling and fantasy. That's taken off in a major way. I would say that a big missing or an underserved piece of the esports marketplace is actually the notion of, I don't want to say live events, because obviously, Riot creates its own events, ESL organizes the tournaments, but anything that can pull together communities of gamers in person. And by that, I mean, when I went to the North American Summer Championships, I thought almost the best part of it was actually getting a chance to connect with people who I was connected to online, in person. And a lot of times you have to wait until there's a tournament, right? And everyone either travels there or shows up at the tournament to meet people or to, get together in person. But I think there's a tremendous opportunity to pull together communities of gamers, enthusiasts, and supporters of esports. However that's done, if it's an app, if it's a social media plugin or tie-in, I think that's a huge, huge deal, because there are a whole host of the communities incredibly large and global, but there's nothing that regionally or locally pulls these groups of people together. And I think that would be a great opportunity for someone who approached it the right way.
Excellent. And Hawkeye has finally gotten back into his office, so he's got a real internet connection now.
I'm so happy. My poor Surface was crying, trying to stay connected to the Wi-Fi.
All right. So we're talking about if an entrepreneur wanted to focus on something in esports, where would you point them? And we've talked about a little bit about betting and hearing a little bit about stats and sort of the analyzing win-loss performance. What are your thoughts? Where do you think the real opportunities lie?
The real opportunity is in emerging games. I work for Hitbox TV now. I'm the director of North American content. And while League of Legends and all these games are great and they have huge player bases and they're going a lot of places, they are really saturated. There's lots of people trying to start teams. There's a new betting website that pops up every month. I probably get 6 to 8 emails a week of a new team that wants me to give them, $100,000 to do something. I don't know, because they're going to be the next best team ever. But the opportunity is in emerging games. When I worked at Curse, one of my big things was to find new games that were going to be big. And the 2 games I recommended we work in were Counter-Strike and Smite, back when they were both brand new and had very little support. Both of those games have exploded. and Smite with their new SPL has taken off. And there's I just came back from PAX Prime. There were at least 5 serious indie contenders there with esports plans. So the real opportunity is in identifying where esports are going to happen, identifying new games and new trends, and getting on board with them. Because the esports
and what does getting on board look like?
And that's going to be everything from the first guys to put together a solid professional league for Rocket League, other than ESL's kind of half-assed thrown together thing right now, is going to do really well. The first guy who finds the next MOBA that's going to be big and develops the first tournament site for it, or develops the first big team for it. I mean, Heroes of the Storm was kind of the last bubble we all had a chance to jump on. And we've already seen 2 solid new esports brands come out of that game with 2Arc and Tempo Storm. Neither one of them had the capital.
Those are teams?
Those are teams, yes. 2Arc and Tempo Storm. And they would not have had they didn't have the capital that the big guys had. When my buddy from Curse, Steve, when he went to Team Liquid, they had a huge cash injection. These little guys 2Arc is 3 guys. And they're great guys, but they've never had the money to buy their way into League of Legends. But through Heroes of the Storm, they picked it up early. They found good players early. They identified it. They were working on Heroes of the Storm a year ago. And it's just now having its first big tournament in Vegas next week. So they got on this train. They've now been able to put together teams and sponsorship and funding that allows them to expand into other titles. Tempo Storm picked up Hearthstone players. They're looking at League of Legends teams. They're looking at Dota teams. They have a Counter-Strike team. But none of that is stuff they could have done in the beginning with their capital. What they did was they identified a good game, got on it early, and used that to build the foundation to expand into the current big games.
So is there an opportunity for something like Halo 5, or is that going to be dominated by players who were pros in previous Halos?
There's going to be a lot of domination there, but it comes down to it's not about the players who get involved, it's about the brands. Because everyone thought Halo would emerge a bunch of new brands, but then you had Optic, Envy, Denial, who all jumped on signing teams, and they scooped up all the talent. And a lot of it comes down to support from developers. Nobody was sure how Halo's esports support would be when they changed developers. There were a lot of promises that didn't really come through with the Master Chief Collection. So there was a lot of skepticism, and there were a couple of new brands to emerge, but they got bought up and stomped pretty quick. So that's the problem with established titles, is even games that release every year, they have these established brands that are going to go into them. They're going to eat up the talent really, really quickly. I mean, before Halo had announced their first major tournament, Envy had a squad of 4 guys that were 4 of the best people playing on the assumption that there would be tournaments soon. It's hard to compete with that as a startup with no major capital.
Yeah. So we're a little after 3:00. I know that some folks are going to have to jump off. We've got a really interesting conversation going, so I'm going to keep it running. But for those of you who do have to leave, you can find a replay or our podcast later on StartupJab.com. And if you've got a little more time, stick around and continue the conversation. So we have a conversation. We have a question. from Seth. Seth,
I didn't want to interrupt.
Your own question out?
Yeah, Mike, I was just wondering if you saw mobile games breaking into the esports world.
Absolutely. I mean, there's already a MOBA that's completely tablet-based that just had a $1 million tournament in Korea.
Wow.
They had a huge booth at PAX with people playing there. I forget which, but one of the big esports brands there, they were a part of their booth doing a tournament there. MadGlory, that's it, MadGlory. Yeah. And it looks super fun. I haven't played it yet because I have a Kindle Fire, which was a horrible mistake. Because my ridiculous version of Android supports nothing. It looks really neat. And what it's going to come down to is who can find a way to make a mobile game that's competitive and fun. And I know of at least 2 mobile developers right now who are working on that. And there's always going to be things like Hearthstone. I can play competitive Hearthstone just as well on my phone as I can on my PC.
Right.
Hey, Mike, I just want to get your take on that because the nature of typically mobile use is a bit more ephemeral, and people are using their phones a lot more than they did 2 or 3 years ago. But do you feel like the usage styles of most mobile users will make mobile games worthwhile or as an esports title, right?
Yeah, you have to build for your market. So when you're building an esports title for your phone, you can't reskin League of Legends and stick a 45-minute match timer on a mobile game.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that while I'm on the way to work. I'm not going to be sitting on the subway and be like, I got 45 minutes. Let's play a League of Legends game. But if you can come out with something that works on a competitive level with a 3 to 5 minute game time, Nova Blitz, which is a new card game coming out, which is run on simultaneous turns, super fast response times required. That's a perfect example of a game that can run massively competitively because I can sit at home and build my deck on their PC client, and then I can sit on my phone and play competitions that take 3 to 5 minutes on my way to work and be competitive. And because you're talking simultaneous turns, the whole game is built around this having to make quick decisions, which allows them to also artificially shorten turn timers. You can have great competition in a 3 to 5 minute match time. You could probably stretch it to 10, but 3 to 5 would be your ideal. And it just comes up to who's going to do it well first.
Right. Establish that model. I agree, definitely.
What about Oculus eSports Championship?
Oh, God. I have an astigmatism. The Oculus makes me really sick. I went to the booth anyways at PAX because it was worth getting sick over. I don't know. Like, it depends on Oculus. The way Oculus changes the environment. I mean, I'd love to see an FPS tournament where everybody had the vest that vibrates wherever you've been hit, and the Omni treadmill, so you actually have to run on the frictionless treadmill, and an Oculus and one of those gun controllers. I'd watch it. I think that would be amazing. In fact, if anyone has that idea, email me. Hitbox will sponsor it. I promise right now, because I would love to see that.
Well, there was that movie. What was that movie with
Gamer?
Yeah. Anybody who wants to put that together, I'm game. Send me an email.
We'll talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds fun. At what point, though, does that just become we're now basically playing paintball?
Right. At what point is it? At what point is it a gimmick? At what point are we laying stuff over Call of Duty that doesn't need to be laid over Call of Duty? Like, I can play an FPS on a. Yeah, there we go. Let's get real bullets involved. At that point, I think we've just gone to reintroducing gladiators.
Speaking of reintroducing gladiators, have you guys seen the gladiator suits that this company in, I think it's Australia, is trying to crowdfund? Is full contact weapons combat with gladiator suits that protect the fighters, but that record the hits with the location and the impact, and then like track the theoretical health levels. And so you can do full contact fighting with swords and staves and whatever, and not die from it.
I only watch
that part.
I didn't hear about that. That sounds interesting.
I said I only watch that if it's cosplay based.
It seems interesting. And it's just, I think the problem with things like Oculus and esports is at what point are we laying basically a gimmick over our competition? And I don't think there's a current title that fits it well. That being said, there's a lot of development specifically for Oculus. Someone could make a great competitive title that's Oculus dependent, and then that's when you could see an Oculus esport. I would, if it comes out in the next couple of years, I'll be amazed. I mean, one, it's not common technology. We still don't have, still have a VHS Betamax type war of whose VR is going to take over. Because there's probably 8 decent VR companies out there right now. But yeah, I mean, eventually it's probably going to happen, but it's going to have to be built for Oculus, not like an existing title that we're just laying Oculus over.
You mentioned earlier that you would suggest folks emerging games is the place to be, and that you mentioned either starting a team as a brand, not trying to necessarily start as a player, but trying to put together a team, or starting tournaments or leagues. How would you suggest that somebody decide between those two opportunities?
I mean, it's a tough call, but I think it comes down to where your passion is, what you think you can do well. I've done both. I started off as a tournament director, and then I ran teams. They are not even a little bit similar. I learned that the really hard way when Curse was like, so we're not doing tournaments anymore, so you need to start running teams, or we don't really have a job for you anymore. I learned really fast how to run teams. Okay. But the thing is, it's going to come down to what type of person you are and what you can do. Because if you're an outgoing, you're kind of like, for me, I came from a sales background. And so working with and recruiting teams, doing that kind of stuff was a very natural fit for me. Whereas running tournaments, which I got into on accident, I was a shoutcaster and we ran out of admin. So they're like, hey, you're shoutcasting this tournament. Can you also admin it? And I was like, well, if that's the only way it's going to happen. For that, it's are you more organized? How are you, because there's a lot more that goes into organizing an event. And you need more backing. You need an ability to, you can start a team just with 4 friends and yourself, or even just with 5 people who are good at the game, and you can just kind of run with it. Maybe you're successful, maybe you're not. Tournaments are a whole different thing. You need a little more backing. You need a more professional environment. You need something to attract top teams to come in. And it's doable. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that will sponsor your tournament if you have a good idea, you can show a good business plan, build a, I've spent more time working on marketing decks in the last 5 years than I probably have sleeping. If you can show a good plan, you can get that backing and support. But I would say, starting a tournament series versus starting a team is a much more serious endeavor. Starting a team is kind of something you can do in your free time, see if it works, see how it goes. Tournament is not. Tournament is a commitment, and a really big one if you want to do it well.
It's like putting on a conference, basically, a mini conference.
Sure. Yeah, and I've done both. I mean, I ran the Reign of Gaming Land, which we flew teams out from all over the world, 75 grand prize pool, all the logistics of running a live event, and then I've run, daily online tournaments. And there's even just saying I want to run a tournament isn't a thing. It's what kind of tournament am I running? What environment is it in? How do we keep? And it's a mess. It's fun. It is a mess.
Yeah. So we got a question from the chat here, going back to the ESPN job that we talked about a little bit earlier, but now we've got some other folks in here. ESPN just posted a listing for an eSports editor for the first time, and Factor in the chat is asking, what should a network like that keep in mind when filling this role? Aside from the fact that they're doing an about face and need to do some damage control, perhaps, given what they said about a year ago about esports. What do you guys think is necessary for a role like that, for an esports editor for ESPN?
There's a lot of education. You have to really know what the games. I mean, basically every esports commentator or director right now, current. I guess director is different. I'm thinking about a commentator. Yeah,
commentator, they'll work with the established personalities. For a director of esports, it's a job I've done at a couple companies.
You still need to know a little bit about,
you need to know the games, but more importantly, someone who understands the medium. Because I've watched a couple of different events that ESPN has put on for esports, and it doesn't fit their traditional format. There is no way to shoehorn esports into a traditional ESPN sports format. And they need someone who understands that. And I would say the absolute critical thing in hiring is someone who, in the interview, has a plan for how they're going to fit together. Because esports doesn't work the way traditional sports does. We run massively long show times with really weird scheduling of commercial breaks. We have 20-minute content blocks followed by 70-minute content blocks. You can't do a TV timeout in League of Legends. And then on top of that, television is a horrible medium for esports. It is an absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
I'm biased. I work for a live streaming company, but television is a terrible medium for esports. Yeah. The internet is where people who like esports are. And if ESPN is going to seriously invest in esports, which I would love to see, then they need to understand that it's a massively online medium. They need to be working with live streaming companies. They need to be working with that kind of stuff and not trying to take esports and force it into television. I remember back in the way back in the day when Counter-Strike was on television, and everybody was like, what do we need to do to get esports on television? We're now at a point, esports doesn't need television. We really...
Esports has leapfrogged television.
Exactly. Well, every time somebody tells me, hey, what do we need to do to get esports on the TV? And I'm just like, don't. What we need to do to get esports on TV is to not get esports on TV. It's a horrible medium for it. It doesn't have a great monetization strategy that fits esports. It's not interactive. There's so much about the internet and live streaming, which is already the medium we all use to play these games, that is just superior to traditional format television. It's not something ESPN is going to solve easily. So I would say the absolute thing their director needs to understand is the games and how you're going to blend this traditional content method with what is traditionally a live streamed event. And I do not envy that person with that job. Yeah. That would,
it's a big job. And when I saw the posting go around Twitter, and I'm sure they're going to be inundated with resumes and references, etc. But I think the key to, I think they should keep in mind that they're building a presence in esports, not taking esports to the masses. And I think people thought, well, now that ESPN is covering esports, now everybody's going to watch it, or everyone's going to love it, and they can do it like you said, Mike. They can do it the same way they do traditional sports, and I think that's exactly what they shouldn't try to do. They should try to understand the medium. They should try to engage the community the proper manner, and kind of build their presence. So I know that they're the 800-pound gorilla, sports media gorilla, but I don't think that they should take that approach here. They should take a newcomer approach where they're going to make the right hire and build out a solid presence that's going to help them grow with esports, not try to take it, co-opt it, do what they did with Major League Baseball, NBA, etc., but accept it for what it is and engage it that same way, right?
As Cliff says in the chat, they should not treat esports like they do the X Games.
No, not even a little bit. In esports, people won't stand for that. And the problem is and I think this is asking an incredible amount of humility from a mass media giant, but they're going to have to come into this and realize that they're not – the average viewer age on ESPN is something like mid-50s, and every time something plays on ESPN, it's mostly just everybody on Twitter like, what are these newfangled vidya games doing? Where's my football? I want to watch the third Super Bowl again on ESPN Classics, not this Dota something. Like, it hasn't done well with their audience, which means they need to find a way to engage a new audience. And for me, as an esports fan, why do I care about it being on ESPN? Like, what possible benefit do I have to sitting down in front of my television instead of my computer, which is also attached to my television?
Just turn on Xbox One onto Twitch, and you can watch.
Or Hitbox maybe.
Or Hitbox, yeah.
or the fact that a lot of the esports fans and enthusiasts they're not even subscribed to ESPN. Right?
For like 5 years.
Yeah, that's the honest truth of it. So.
It's the cable cutting generation as well. So that's another thing that they're probably, I'm not sure if they're thinking about that at all, but I mean, this is the millennials of the generation where they're going to be cable cutting. And
what does my live stream cost me? I can go to Hitbox or any of those places and watch this event for free, or I can renew my $125 a month cable package to watch the one esports event they're able to negotiate a deal with a year, maybe 2, maybe 3. That's the other thing is with the way their content generation works and the way they put money into things, are they going to be able to negotiate? Do you really see an ESPN executive sitting down with somebody like DreamHack, a relatively small to them Swedish company, and negotiating to get DreamHack? No, ESPN's going to show like the International, the League of Legends World Finals, and maybe a Counter-Strike major if someone remembers to introduce them to ESL. Like, that's it. That's what they're going to work with. They're not going to be like, hey, there's these 6 guys in Orlando that are running an event that's going to become a Dota major because someone gave them $500,000. We should go talk to them and get content rights for that. They're not going to negotiate enough content.
As Cliff says in the chat, what about if instead of focusing on broadcast events, ESPN focuses on highlights, news, the kind of shows that are high on production and editing, and less about delivering the content that's available elsewhere? What do you guys think about that approach?
GameSpot, how that went?
I think
how did On Gamers go for them?
I think it's going to be difficult just to introduce it into their medium now. I mean, what are they going to put top 10 plays? Is there going to be like a League of Legends top 10 play on Friday?
Jim Rome is burning. Jim Rome talking about that sick gank that was in the LCS last night.
Or fail flash, What's not top 10? What is that?
Top 5, top 5 fails. Someone missing a flash over a wall, and the whole ESPN audience sitting there going, I don't get it.
It's going to be difficult.
What is this?
I think the way they did it with MMA, though, is they started talking about the athletes, and they started introducing it slowly with MMA. MMA is still not even there, though, on ESPN, if you notice.
No, it does well on its own channels.
Yeah, it does well on its own channels. So, I mean, I don't even think that it's going to – I don't see it really working too well. But hey, guys, I just wanted to say that I had awesome talking with you guys. It was great to meet everyone, and I got a jet. I have a meeting soon.
Yeah, we're that's actually a good cue for us to wrap this up. We initially planned for an hour, and we've gone almost to an hour and a half. Thank you guys for the wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
I am going to let everybody here, if you've got something you want to plug, give us, we'll go around and say your URLs. Seth, you got to leave first. Give us something to plug. What are you working on?
Mubs and I have worked on some side projects before. Now Playoffs was one. It's basically a scheduling app where you could schedule games with multiplayer games on Twitter. There was Teemo. That was a team one. I don't know. They're on Reddit. It's not really a big deal.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that was a horrible plug.
I'll go
Fletch,
next.
what about you?
Yeah, I just like to say thank you for having me on. But anyone who's interested in hearing more about the esports industry or just connecting, just follow me on Twitter, Fletch Unleashed, and I'd be happy to follow you back and we can get a dialogue going.
Excellent. And what's the URL for Entiva?
Oh yeah, Entiva Group. That's ENTIVAGROUP.net. That's on my Twitter too. And if you want to reach out either way, I'd be glad to hear from anyone.
Excellent. And Mike or Hawkeye?
Yeah, it's interchangeable at this point. I have people I've worked with for years who aren't sure what my actual name is.
Good.
For me, just come check us out on Hitbox TV. We're pushing boundaries in the streaming world. We've brought a lot of new things to the table. We're super excited about our platform, especially some of the new esports partners we're working with. I'm really excited about what we have planned for the rest of this year in 2016. So on Twitter, you can find me at FLGHawkeye, and be sure to come by hitbox.tv and check out some of the content we're working on over there.
Fantastic. And on behalf of myself and Jason Nellis, we are StartupJab. You can subscribe to our mailing list at startupjab.com, and we talk about all kinds of startup things, and it sounds like esports is pretty interesting. We might do another show on this in the near future. So thank you guys all for listening.
Thank you guys.
That's